Next up on our 4,000 down series, Aerocrastic is going to use the ever-overpowered Kugath to take on the Greenskins. So for those of you guys who aren't familiar, recently I did a video with Harry the Hammer against Vampire Counts, where the player took Harry the Hammer and did not take, like, what was it, 3,000 to 4,000 points worth of stuff. Aerocrastic sent me this replay quite a while ago. In fact, I helped roll back to the 3.0 update. Not that it'll have a lot of bearing on this replay, except that the flappers of the Greenskins are actually at their full power here. Oh no, these are actually spiky rollers. Interesting. Okay. We've got Grom the Paunch here and some spiky rollers. And then we've got some Spider Rider archers, a couple of Arachnarok spiders here, including the Queen, Goblin Big Boss, and that's it pretty much for the Greenskins. So a little bit of a weird build, I will admit, but yeah, you can see the balance of power is already reflecting the fact that Aerocrastic, the legend of many championships of Total War Warhammer 2, has been in retirement from competitive for most of Warhammer 3, but still does play on occasion, and did send me this one, which is just disgusting. Yeah, so Kugath is insanely overpowered in land battles, especially against certain factions. Yes, he is vulnerable to missiles, but I do think he needs a rebalance in order to help smooth out those two facts, right? And the biggest thing is that factions who have to kill him in melee struggle very heavily. Greenskins are one that can take missiles, but in this matchup it can also be a little bit risky to do so. They're not the best missiles in the world, and, you know, I mean, Orc Airboys certainly can be decent, but just generally not thought of as a missile faction, right? Much better generally with their melee power. Think about factions like any of the other, you know, Chaos monogods other than Tzeentch, like Slaanesh or Khorne, Warriors of Chaos themselves. You know, obviously the Vampire Counts lacking any kind of ranged units. All those factions are going to struggle very heavily with Kugath, and even factions that can take ranged units, oftentimes in land battles, if you take Kugath with a lot of mobility, it's not too hard to shut down the ranged units to such a degree that Kugath can just kill all of the melee stuff. One thing I think that needs to happen is for Kugath to get his melee defense nerfed. 55 is high enough, especially with Cloud of Flies active, gives an extra +9. A lot of stuff is just going to struggle to hit him, and in fact, he can beat almost any single entity in the game in single combat. So there is that. I will concede, though, that he is a little bit vulnerable to missiles, even in campaign. It's probably his biggest downside. I mean, obviously, his slow speed. But it might be worth it to give him like a 5 to 10% base missile resistance on top of his physical resistance, just to kind of help, you know, make him less vulnerable to missiles, but more vulnerable in melee with the melee defense nerfs. Just kind of smooth out, because right now he is very vulnerable to missiles. I mean, in campaign, you can kit him up with extra, like, armor and missile resistance items and such, to the degree that he is significantly less vulnerable to missiles. But certainly in multiplayer and in early campaign, he can be quite vulnerable to missiles. Thankfully, in campaign, you're primarily fighting Helm and Gorst early on. Not too much of a problem, at least in Immortal Empires, but the spiky rollers are going to get in here, start to carve up these support units. Right now, the Greenskins are doing the smart thing, which is just to sit back and play off their missile units as much as possible, and not really focus too much on Kugath himself, mostly just, at least with their melee units, trying to pick away at these support troops and get rid of them. That said, Aerocrastic does have these Plague Drones up in the sky, which have been focus firing on the Arachnarok Queen, which is definitely going to hurt, but both the spiders now move in, 2v1, with archer support. You would think they do very well here, but in fact, one of the spiders momentarily distracted. Looks like they're now focusing 2v1 on Kugath, but the missile support from those Plague Drones is actually pretty significant. Extra models they got in the 3.0 update definitely telling pretty well in this engagement. But we'll see. Of course, the spiky rollers can still deal damage pretty significantly if they get a good surround on Kugath. Perhaps, perhaps not. We'll see. But anyway, for the time being, it looks grim for Nurgle. And we are going to probably step into a fast forward in just a minute here. We'll appreciate these Plague Drones throwing their death's heads a few more times into the Queen. Of course, getting rid of the Queen early on is pretty important. You don't want those summons, just the extra little spiderling summons over time to help out with these engagements. And the Queen just generally pretty decent. Arachnarok spiders have a little bit low weapon strength, especially against Nurgle, where it's going to be taken even lower by poison pretty much all the time. It's a little bit tough for them to get really effective hits, and especially with Kugath's massive HP pool. And healing, he obviously can sustain through that damage, no problem. That is one thing about Kugath. He actually has the same base price as a Great Unclean One. Exalted Great Unclean One, I should say, but has, like, way more health and way more armor, to the point where you pretty much never take the Exalted Great Unclean One for any reason in multiplayer. Just take Kugath, right? And I will say, for the people who play Domination, I mean, Kugath is not going to be ever that great in Domination, I don't think, because of his slow speed. Domination tends to reward ability more so. I mean, certainly certain maps and matchups, he might be very good in Domination, but just generally, he's going to be less oppressive than he is in land battles. It's just, in land battles, he is just terrible. And we're now going to switch into fast forward as the queen has been routed off, and this is going to take some time, so we can kind of just continue to talk about things as Kugath grinds it out. He's got the spider going down pretty hard. I mean, granted, this Greenskins player really should be in with all of his pump wagons right now, just supporting this fight, like killing all these Nurglings. Pump wagons could also do some pretty good damage to the plague drones, but you can see how low Kugath is actually getting here. Will he pop? Looks like his leadership is going to hold. But keep in mind also that as the Greenskins player wobs in with everything, they're all going to be getting hit by that Mortis effect. And that's one of the biggest issues I see with Kugath. Not that I think it needs to be changed necessarily. It kind of fits his design and Nurgle's design, right, for him to be both very tanky and have that Mortis effect. Generally, I mean, I guess before the tankiest unit with the Mortis effect, in some circumstances in Warhammer 2 would have been the Fae, because of her magic resistance, but now that's certainly changed where she's very squishy. Even the Skaven Plague Furnace, which you don't see too often these days, was very good for a long time. Decent amount of HP and armor, still nowhere near as tanky as Kugath, obviously. Couldn't self-heal and everything else, so yeah, the combination of that Mortis effect and him being so tanky, like here, you can see with Cloud of Flies up to 64 melee defense, right? And that's not even considering the fact that you're debuffing your opponent's weapon strength constantly with poison. So also got this -5 melee attack Slime Trail aura, which again decreases effective hit chance against him. It's like adding another 5 on top of that melee defense, right? Plus, you know, other abilities here. Plague Father's Oration for a temporary melee defense buff, and he is getting to his healing cap here, but it doesn't end up mattering. Yeah, it doesn't matter at all, unfortunately, for the Greenskins, as they all just simply die to attrition. So, I mean, again, it's a little bit of a weird replay. It's odd builds on both sides, so it's maybe not the best example, but you can find plenty of other examples on this channel and on others of Kugath absolutely carrying land battles to a massive extent, especially against certain factions. Again, he's much more vulnerable to factions that can take a lot of missiles. But even still, in those circumstances, he is quite good, and I just, again, think that they kind of need to smooth out those two facts, right? His vulnerability and his strength are both too extreme, and they should be brought a little more into line. Still, you know, should be very tanky in melee and somewhat vulnerable to missiles, or even very vulnerable to missiles in comparison to other monsters, but just a little bit less so than he is right now, and a little bit less tanky in melee. Just please, CA. So, yeah, here he gets 4,000 value, which is honestly a little bit on the tame side. The Plague Drones is an interesting bring with him in a lot of matchups where your opponent's not going to have great tools to counter flying shooting units, like in this matchup, and again, like Warriors of Chaos is another good example. Can actually get some really good value just with their shooting attacks alone, and then also come in for some rear charges in the late game. The Spiky Rolla is a little bit misused, maybe could have been sent in a little bit earlier, but I'm not sure it would have really helped at the end of the day. I mean, everything here besides these single entities gets pretty good value. The Ragnarok Spiders, though, just get absolutely pounded, and, I mean, I think maybe the Bloodroot Behemoth can beat Kugath 1v1, I believe. I'm not sure about many other single entities, just because of his pure amount of HP, and that high melee defense, too, is pretty unique for a unit like him. So, yeah, please, CA, can we have some nerfs on Kugath, and also some buffs at the same time. Like I said, I think he really should get another 5 to 10% base missile resistance, just to kind of help him out in that way, and to keep people from, you know, throwing their keyboards across the room. But anyway, what do you guys think about Kugath? He is certainly very oppressive in a lot of land battle matchups, less so in domination, but still can be quite solid. It's got a really good ability set, and I mean, even can be kitted down to be relatively inexpensive, below 3,000. For something this good is definitely a lot, but 14,000 HP, so just one more quick comparison before we end If I throw in another Nurgling here. And we go with Exalted Grade Unclean One. Doesn't matter the lore, they're both the same, but just for the sake of things. So 2,300 base cost, and if we come in here and look at Kugath, he is also the same, 2,300 base cost, just has, 2,000 more HP, 20 more armor, less melee attack, but more melee defense, gains the shooting attack, and all his other abilities there. So, yeah, there's pretty much no reason ever to take the Exalted Grade Unclean One these days. Kugath is just the only thing you ever need. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.